17. Peace Island. Mosquitoes buzzing round my head, Spanish moss for my bed. I very seldom see dry land. I'm an alligator man. When I take my hides to town, all the people gather round. They all just want to shake the hand of this alligator man. Cajun song from the Red Gator Juke Band. We six didn't see our shipmates for 4 days. When we did, it was to begin feverish work to dismantle our treasured ark and get the pieces out of sight into the settlement. Vesta had been sent upriver from one oxbow bayou to the next. 2 dugouts and 3 light bark canoes, almost all the boats they had, were used to run silently up and down river to look for Yankees. With extreme caution, they stayed hidden except once. Vesta had almost reached a narrow, shallow bayou for shelter near dawn when a Yankee sailing cutter from the Montauk, I suppose, came down from upriver. The spying dugout staged a diversion, pretending to be surprised, and fled precipitously as if in panic across the stream and upriver into a tiny creek mouth. The cutter could see the fleeing boat, which had not happened in a season or so, and the Yankees went in hot pursuit, firing rifles. A shot hit a paddler in the shoulder. His name was Bowles, like dozens of others there, all children of William the Genius, whose genes were as valued as his silver tongue had been. The wounded man survived, and our graces nursed him tenderly. Soon the dugout's crew pulled ashore and fled with their wounded mate. They escaped, knowing all the paths, but the dugout, 25 feet long, had to be abandoned. Now, however, I thought, as I heard the tale, they had a proa and 3 whaleboats. The latter, however, were clumsy with oars in the swampy river. Paddles would have to be used. The distraction saved Vesta. After dusk, as the Yanks withdrew upriver after searching all day unsuspecting of our ship, Vesta was leapfrogged again upstream. Fortunately, we, our crew, were nowhere near Fort Jackson as yet. The Vesta was towed slowly into our oxbow bayou, and swimmers behind her pulled waterlogged big limbs of trees into the carefully dredged 2-fathom channel. They stuck up above water and convinced every Yankee that there was nothing there to check, except an eddy where snags collected and shifted every time the tide changed. The river had a 2-foot tide far up, but not up to the level that we were. As we worked to take apart Vesta, we were getting to know our new home. Here, most blacks and whites lived in the fort and most of the creeks in the nearby village. There were exceptions, of course. In the fort, neat rows of 1-room cabins lined the square inside. Many cabins were empty. Emancipation had led many ex-slaves to leave, seeking distant and long-lost relatives, or fleeing to Haiti in despair at the Yankees' growing power and vigilance and the settlement's poverty. Freedom, once available nowhere else, now exulted abroad in the land, but with many a tragic or comic scenario. The South was a garden with broken walls, invaded on all sides by thorny weeds, poison nightshades, boll weevils, termites, and voracious potato bugs, all in human and disreputable form. Most of us moved into 4 cabins in the fort and 2 empty chickies in the village. These 6 dormitories were a little cramped, but cozy. Some of us spent some time in the fort and some with the natives. Bob Sanger and Lala immediately started building, out of Vesta's deck and cabins, a small, snug 2-room cabin outside the fort and village both, They were warned about cougars, known as painters or panthers, which were plentiful and lethal. One young woman was mauled and killed soon after our arrival. Bears were much less common, but they could tear a cabin apart, we were told. And there were skunk apes, mysterious, hairy, stinking, two-legged beasts, which seemed, from what they said, to closely resemble the Patag's hairy people. All this scared Lala and Sanger not at all. They wanted privacy, and got it in a lovely spot under live oaks. A sunny porch overlooked a little bayou. They started a trend. Other buildings began to arise outside of the defenses. Perhaps indeed our best recourse if attacked was flight, not fight, as Bob Sanger argued. Still, the Creeks disapproved. They advised everyone to gather in the fort if threatened. They were mindful of their old people, children, and women, and trusted the walls more than their ancestral forest primeval, which so far had failed to protect them from General Old Hickory Jackson and his upstart angry Southrons with their slaves. The Creek tribe had for many generations adopted all comers into the tribe, if found congenial. This was a loving trait. The Seminoles, who are often called a separate tribe, were simply a corps of Muskogean people. That's what the Creeks call themselves, Muskogean. The Seminoles were a corps of Muskogean people with many adoptees of all races and of faraway tribes too. They had fewer roots than the more settled Creeks, having had to fight for decades. Both tribes had been abducted or forced to leave in the Trail of Tears by Jackson and state of Georgia and others. One woman, Polly Parker, in 1838, I think, that wonderful year, Polly Parker was deported aboard a ship from the west coast of Florida. She escaped the ship and swam ashore near St. Mark's. Eventually, this free woman rose to a place of leadership among the Creeks. Her children and the Jacksonites found much common ground in resistance. The recently deceased cougar-mauled young woman was named Polly Bowles, showing her heritage of rebellion on both sides of her family, Creek and White. The shadow of William Bowles was by far the largest here, however. It should have been called Fort Bowles. Bob and Lala were not afraid and kept 2 rifles ready, loaded and clean, in case of attack by beasts. But our Kanakas suffered another annoyance. It was mosquitoes. They were few or absent in Hawaii, and fate had given us a long trip without them. Climate and season was wrong for the little vampires, both in Alaska and Patagonia. And aboard ship, the sea breezes blew them away. But here, in stifling still heat, there was no escape, hardly even a cooling breeze night or day. The heat was unlike well-tempered Hawaii. Creeks would sit around smoky fires all day for relief from mosquitoes, but the smokes made us and the Kanakas cough too much. We smeared many things on us, mints and garlic and so on, but to little avail. Alligators seemed to us to be very smart, but lazy and untrustworthy, to say the least. They stayed out of the settlement, however. Our telepathy had temporarily deserted us in all the distractions and fears. They, the Jacksonites, had evolved many rules to live here in isolation. First, there were no guns fired within a mile of the fort in all directions, and often hunters used only the silent bows and arrows. One gunshot, if heard, could doom the entire town. The stakes were that high. Deer and gators were hunted for meat, far away from the fort. This was also a rule intended to keep the friendship of the local animals, but in this, it was largely a failure. No doubt the sensitive animals could smell the meat in the hunters. Once, as I sweated over lowering Vesta's mainmast with all of us, a party of gator hunters came in, carrying large chunks of meat. The nearby Tom and Charlie, and Tom and Tom and Charlie, raised their heads and snapped their jaws. The hunters threw gobbets of meat at them, yelling, "You're just like us! Here, eat this!" Sure enough, the reptiles tossed chunks up and caught them and gulped them down, as if to say, "Oh yeah, well you're next." We also learned about rattlesnakes, who hid in leaf piles, copperheads, smelling like cucumbers, coiled up in the paths, and cottonmouths floating wide-mouthed in the river. We shuddered at all of these, and telepathy was out of the question. Our 3 peace dogs eagerly leapt ashore, and feared no snakes, it seemed. They brought us a large dead timber rattler, to much praise. We prayed and buried the body. We reserved a birthing bed for Liberty in a cabin in the fort, safe and quiet. Her time was near, and soon her sole white pup was born, with one blue eye and one white. Junette and her chick Squawk and Junior found a roosting place on one cabin roof, but spent little time there. Mariner was our first deserter, seeming restless until he disappeared one night. We knew he wasn't dead, as he let out a huge farewell call as he flew off into the night, never to return. Fly well, friend. May you live long and prosper. The 4 apes were bewildered and very shy at first, but soon took to the trees and only came down when it suited them. They loved one old avocado tree particularly. They seemed to like our company still, however, and were never far away. But they made the best of local bananas and oranges. The Creeks were amused by them and soon spoke sign language to them with laughter. Fort Jackson had orchards, pecans, tangerines, many peaches, cherries, apricots, mulberries, and others. None of the trees was more than 15 years old, dating the settlement's creation, but they were well pruned and carefully thinned by hand for optimum yield. Much care was lavished on them in compost, muck, and manure mostly. Labor was roughly divided by race. The orchards and gardens and grain and tobacco fields were tended mostly by Negroes with horses, and many Creek women also took part. High Jolly's horses and cows, goats, and sheep had mostly black herders. Whites, on the other hand, dominated certain jobs. There was a school whose 5 teachers, 3 women and 2 men, were all white and very hard working. All the children in camp loved school and hated to miss a day. The history classes would have made Princeton blush or get enraged or laugh. But Kathy and I, listening in, were amazed and overjoyed. Kathy and I volunteered to teach. She taught maths and science. I preferred history and English. We were popular teachers. There was no schedule, no vacation, no bells, no grades, no compulsion to attend school. But no child wanted to miss it. And those who played hooky, so to speak, to fish or to swim, were teased and ridiculed. Plus they, the truants, grew very bored and returned to classes, where loud arguing and jokes, practical and otherwise, kept everything exciting. Our teachers joked back in revenge. Stories were told by Creek and black women on occasion to the children. Our blacksmith shop was mostly manned by whites, although Big Brutus and a Creek smith also were there daily. The trades were learned by all 3 races gradually. There was a gunsmith shop, headed by an old grizzled Kentuckian who claimed descent from Davy Crockett and took on his name. I think the late great frontiersman who fell at the Alamo would have approved our group. All 3 groups of racial people wanted to learn to make and repair guns, and the blacksmiths and gunsmiths always had lots of spectators, old and young. The school teachers took their pupils to such places to watch about every other day. The children liked the variety a lot. The adults loved to have kids watching and did their best work. We also had coopers, black and white, a smokehouse, creeks and blacks, wheelwrights and wagoners, white and black, a dairy, creek and white women. Our Indians had more varied roles. Creeks in the forest all around knew about us, but they never told whites about us. And they came in canoe loads almost every day to trade meat and powder and shot, etc., for our products. Ironwork, drums, tanned leather. Our tannery was half black, half white. Grain and tobacco and dried squashes, etc. Creeks did most of the hunting. All creek parties could poses from one or another of the still existing poor villages along all the rivers. They were thinly scattered, but not hidden like the Jacksonites. Disease, drunkenness, and theft were sadly rife in our Creek relatives' homes. But they connived to keep our existence secret, or befogged at least. Most whites in Mobile or Pensacola, we were told, considered Fort Jackson to be simply an old wives' tale, preserved from Jackson's Seminole Wars of the 1810s and 20s. Joke on you, white man. So our Creeks mingled and traded freely in their turban-like headgear, not speaking English when they were within earshot of white people. Sphinx seemed to resist our changes the most. This snooty character had to watch as her queenly domain shrunk daily about her. She refused to leave the ship or touch the mud or water. Esau madly teased her and jumped into the mud and back aboard the diminishing pile of boards, to Sphinx's utter disgust and contempt. But she soon had to come off her high horse and go ashore, complaining all the way to the fort. We carried her and Esau over the watery parts of the path. To her further disgust and his eagerness, he climbed to the top of my head as I stepped carefully over the submerged causeway, heavily laden for the 10th time. He made me drop an address book into the quicksand. Oh well, I wasn't going to look up my old college chums anyway, or so I thought then. Other ventures we had, too many to list. Firewood, all kinds of men. Cooking, all women. And baby care, black women. Clothing making and repair, Creek women. We seemed to enjoy working in racially separate groups, but there was no animosity about it. Our crew brought skills unknown here to the joy of all. Art instruction. Adam and Eve had to watch most of the ship's paintings disassembled plank by plank. Jewelry was taught, dancing, acrobatics, and especially music. Of course, musicians were already there, yet our instruments and polished performances enchanted all, especially the children. We revived the perpetual choir, some days in the creek camp, some days in the fort. The noise was not dangerous, we thought. Only gunshots could carry through the thick forest. Our lives were intertwining with the Jacksonites very intimately. Adam, Eve, Abel, and Lilith were especially overjoyed and spent most nights in a group in one Negro cabin or another, teaching to wide-eyed children and adults, or learning wide-eyed themselves. We revived the theater group. This time it was men and women both, and the lines were all memorized. Jacksonites at last reveled in culture of a type which they had regretfully put down as a luxury when they adopted outlawry for their various reasons. And now I must close this paean of praise to this small, brave, and beleaguered band of 250 souls, deep in a fetid, trackless jungle of dangerous beasts and men. The lessons we learned came faster and faster until the worm hit the apple of our eye and ate into it. first boats came in with goods like nails, salt, and tools, carefully bought far away and brought in by circuitous ruses. But they soon ran out of money or trade items. We sorely shared a longing to give them our money, but we resisted. It was dangerous to buy very much in town, for we supposedly did not exist. We counseled again and decided to hold off on giving except small individual donations. Keeping the secret, however, began to seem more and more of a dishonesty towards this poverty-stricken place. Individuals of us, like the Three Graces, sent a little of their own money to town with Creeks to buy herbs and spices and art supplies. The latter were unavailable in the post-war chaos of old fallen Dixie. Then, Indian Bob and SB ordered, paid for, and got a boatload of rum. Our four heavy drinkers had rationed their small supply on the ship and not shared it at our united request. Fort Jackson had no distillery, nor winery, nor brewery by design. All alcohol was forbidden by the elders, and all in consensus, even cider. Bitter experience had led to this policy. For just one of many reasons, stealth was always essential, and drunks are careless. Bob and Cascadas and Espy and Malinche carried in, with Creek help, 5 barrels of rum on a dark night to a site they had picked 3 miles to the north in thick jungle. There a bonfire raged, all 5 barrels were tapped, and drunken dancing and singing were only hidden by distance. The hangovers, odors, and unexplained absences from camp could not be concealed. Outrage and shame and anger overwhelmed the whole settlement at this. A council was held in Creektown, barely restrained by elders. Some wanted to expel all of us. Others said just the drinkers had to be winnowed out. Confusion, regret, and shame were seen. Also jealousy and envy and gluttony. Pandora's box had been opened when the rum barrels were tapped. As the uproar continued, Espy and Malinche moved full-time to the drunken camp, known as the dump, or A camp for alcohol. Indian Bob recovered his senses and tried manfully to break up the new camp, which he had helped found, and failed. Finally, he surrendered to his own demons and moved there to lie in the mud all night by the fire like the worst of them. He returned to us no more. Even our dear Cascadas, most sensible of all the drinkers, had to tend her poor man and ended up being trapped. Many Creeks and some blacks, but no whites at first, joined them there in foolish wasting of their time, and partially recovering before diving into their own muck again. Kathy called our council. It was a watershed moment. All seemed downhill to doom on all sides. So quickly, in 3 days, we went from peace to chaos. John Barleycorn, spirit of drunkenness, I hate you, as I remember our long ago downfall. It was worse even than it sounds. As a great council met again in the Creek village, our crew hid in shame and had our own sad council. Separation was everywhere. Oh, what confusion I remember. But Kathy and I had a firm opinion. Soon we were joined in this by the 4 apostles, all 4 Kanakas, Jim and Claghorn, and Adam and Sanger. We all came to feel that our sins, our ways, had brought down this paradise. Soon the drunkenness would lead to discovery, in any of several gloomy ways, too sad to review here. So I said, the last thing we can do is give away all our money and leave. That way all of them would, like us, have enough money to travel somewhere and, like hopeful thistledown, float down to sprout new dandelions somewhere, anywhere, but nowhere as fertile as Fort Jackson's free soil. So that's what we did. Without pausing for regrets or second thoughts, we all as one went to our bundles and got out our socks, tobacco pouches, gourds, boxes, and other places containing our gold coins and silver dollars and strange banknotes too. Dejected and jumbled, our sad troop approached the council square. Our Morikis were the saddest of all. They kept rushing to trees and then back to us, sadly signing, "Bad, sick monkey, give dirty food," and other gibberish. Sensing our pain and confusion, we heard singing. A dance was proceeding by the men as women wept freely and the elders sat in stony silence. Many people were missing, brown and black and some white too, of their company. We all fell on our knees. We spilled out, vomited almost, all that money. Weeping, faces in our hands, we paused not even a moment, but returned to our tickies and cabins and began to pack. The dancers never stopped. The drum boomed. The elders sat motionless. The women wept. All that money lay there, some papers moving in a feeble dance in the wind, a lackluster parody of the dance, which went on for hours as we slunk off from the camp by ones and twos. Oh, readers, please do not beg me to tell of how we left that sad place, that defeated time. Let me skip ahead a few weeks. Yes, I must beg this. That's the end of that chapter.